Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is the Agent Evaluation Framework Foundation, which is the first part in a series of Tech Talks around best practices for evaluating agents. My name is Ashley DeShanko, and I'll be your moderator for today. We are broadcasting the session through Teams live events, and the session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name and email address may be viewable by session organizers. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. If you do not consent to be a part of a recorded session, please disconnect your line at this time. The recording will be made available in the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need any support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. If you wish your name not to be visible to organizers or session participants, please post your questions anonymously. We will be responding to your questions throughout the session and also at a live segment at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Akshat Singh, Saurabh Bharati, and Vishal Singh. Akshat, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Ashley. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining. So this is the first part of the Tech Talk series. We are going to present to you around agent evaluation framework. So in this session, we'll cover the foundations of the framework. Then you will have a couple of more sessions coming next month, which talks about designing evaluation sets, metrics, blueprint, governance, lifecycle gate, and other stuff. Vishal, if we can move to the next one. Okay, so in today's session, we'll cover the framework itself, the overview, and the life cycle and design consideration. And then we'll take you through the dimensions and method goals. Let's start with the framework itself. If we can move to, yeah. So AI agents are becoming a core component of Dynamics 365 implementations, extending automation, augmenting workflows, and fundamentally changing how organizations operate their business processes. This creates both opportunity and risk for the teams responsible for delivering and sustaining those implementations. So why traditional testing in success by design? What it does not cover. So standard success by design validation gates are designed for deterministic software. So given a specific input, the system produces a predictable, verifiable output. For example, a sales order created through a standard form follows a defined path. A workflow triggered by a record change behaves consistently. So this is kind of deterministic way of testing where you have binary input and output. But agents break this contract. The same question posed twice may yield different results with agents, and yet both results could be valid, both responses. Agent behavior can shift when the underlying model is updated, or when the grounding data changes, or where an edge case appears that was not covered in traditional testing. So standard test scripts can confirm if an agent responds, but they cannot confirm that it responds correctly, safely, or in a way that serves the business outcome it was built for. So unlike traditional Dynamics 365 configuration and customization, agents make autonomous decisions. They interact with live data, interpret unstructured input, and take action in business systems sometimes without a human in the loop. This introduces a category of risk that unit test or traditional integration test or user acceptance testing alone cannot address. So our success by design by FastTrack already provides a proven framework for delivering reliable D365 solution. But success by design was designed for deterministic software and agents are not deterministic. The same input can produce different output, behaviors can shift as models update, grounding data changes, or users patterns evolve. So traditional testing can confirm if agent is technically correct, but it cannot confirm if the agent is behaving correctly, safely, or in alignment with the business intent. Next slide. Okay, so if my traditional testing isn't enough, what does work? That's where this agent evaluation framework comes in. At the core, agent evaluations are a structured process we use to test how an agent responds to a defined set of inputs and to assess whether those responses actually meet our expectation for quality, reliability, and real world behavior. So let's talk about what makes this fundamentally different from traditional testing we are used to. So first one is no single correct answer. In a unit test, if it is a binary thing, then 2 plus 2 always equals 4 every time. So we have a deterministic behavior. But with an agent, if I ask it to summarize a customer case 5 times, you will probably get 5 different summaries. All of them could be correct. And that breaks the entire assumption behind traditional test automation. Responses may vary, and that's okay. This is the hardest mindset shift for delivery teams. We are used to flagging variation as a defect. In the agentic world, variation within an acceptable range is expected behavior. So our evolution approach has to account for that. We measure whether the response satisfies the intent, not whether it matches a golden string or a set of values. Quality over exact output matching. So instead of a binary pass or fail or a text comparison, we judge responses on a set of qualitative dimensions, which are the relevance, correctness, grounding in the right data, and appropriateness for the business context. And we'll go deeper into these dimensions in one of the next section. So we have to think of it as a rubric, not a checklist. And then last but not the least, we can have more than one right answer. Two different valid responses can both be correct. Our job in evaluation is to define the boundary of what's acceptable, not to chase a single expected output. So evaluation isn't a replacement for testing, it's a different discipline entirely, built for system that region rather than system that execute. And the reason we need to get this right or cost of not doing is exactly what we'll look at next. Okay, so now what's at stake here? Because these are not hypothetical scenarios, these are failure modes that happen on real deployment, often shortly post go live. There are three main categories of risk that should be in front of mind for every team shipping an AI agent into any Dynamics 365 implementation. First, business risk. So imagine an agent processing sales order. It handles 95% of them perfectly, but there's an edge case, a particular order format it wasn't tested against, and it writes incorrect pricing or shipping addresses directly into your live D365 data. By the time anyone notices, you have already got some corrupted records, customer complaints, and a manual remediation exercise that might take days to get resolved. And that's not an AI problem, that's an evaluation gap. Second is compliance risk. So agents that generate financial summaries or respond to customer queries having access to sensitive data. If that agent is not evaluated for data handling, it can surface PII information in some of the outputs, for example, in a Teams chat, in an email body, or in a log file. And that's a regulatory exposure which has serious consequences. Third, and this one is often underestimated, trust risk. So one visible failure in a business critical workflow can set back AI adoption across the entire organization. The stakeholders don't distinguish between that a specific agent had a bug or AI doesn't work. Basically, with trust risk, you lose months of goodwill in a single incident. And here's the thing that makes all three of these painful. Every one of them is preventable. And that's what a structure evaluation gives you. The ability to catch these before they reach production and the monitoring to detect them quickly if the behavior changes after go live. So overall evaluation is not an overhead. It's what makes shipping AI agent safely possible. Okay, so we have just talked about what goes wrong without evaluation. Now let's talk about what goes right when you do it properly. Because evaluation isn't just a risk avoidance. It's how you build AI you can actually stand behind. So there are four reasons why structured evaluation should be a non-negotiable part of every agent delivery. One, ensuring quality standards. So we all know LLMs are very powerful, but they are also unpredictable. They can hallucinate. They can lose context across a long conversation or quietly ignore an instruction. You may have seen that in the Air Canada case. Their chatbot gave a customer incorrect refund policy information, and the airline was held legally liable for it. The agent sounded confident, it just wasn't right. So, regular evaluation is what gives you a continuous signal on whether your agent is performing to the standard your business has committed to. Two is alignment with goals. So business requirements change, compliance obligations change, model updates happen. So each of these can shift what correct looks like for your agent without any change to agent itself. So evaluation keeps you aligned with those moving targets. Without it, your agent gradually drift out of step with the business and you won't know until something breaks. Third one is risk mitigation. So Gartner predicts that by 2026, most enterprises will have adopted AI governance frameworks, and evaluation is a core pillar of that. Proactive evaluation lets you surface safety issues, edge cases failures, and data handling problems in a controlled environment before they become incident in production, and it shifts your posture from reactive to preventive. Last but not the least is early regression detection. So agents don't fail dramatically, they degrade. A model update, any schema changes, any new data pattern, all of these can quietly erode quality over time. So continuous evaluation give you the feedback loop to detect those regressions early before they compound. So think of it like a health check that run continuously, not just at go live. So we need to evaluate the agents throughout the implementation lifecycle and post go live. So putting simply, evaluation is how you measure, improve, and prove quality, not just to yourself, but to the business stakeholders and sponsors who are betting on this agent delivering real outcome. And that's exactly what the agent evaluation framework is designed to give you. A structured way to do this consistently across the full delivery lifecycle. Next. Okay, so what exactly is the agent evaluation framework? At its core, it's a structured governance-driven methodology for evaluating AI agents across full D365 implementation lifecycle. So if you see on this slide, three words on this slide say it all. Structured, governance-driven, lifecycle wide. So the framework answers four fundamental questions that every delivery team needs to have locked down before they ship an agent into production. First one is what to evaluate. So my five dimensions, which we'll cover later. So correctness, safety, reliability, alignment, and efficiency. So not just does it work, but does it work correctly, safely, and consistently for the business outcome it was built to deliver. So as I said, we'll go deep on each of these dimensions later in the session. Then second one is when to evaluate. So as I mentioned in previous slide, so this is not once at go live. So at each and every success by design gate from initiate right through to operate, evaluation is a continuous activity, not a final checkpoint. Each stage of delivery has defined evaluation activities that build on the previous one. Now, how do we measure quality? So this is done through structured rubrics, representative test data sets, and production monitoring. So no ad hoc testing, but documented, repeatable criteria that give you a defensible quality signal edge at each and every stage. Now, who decides? Who is holding the governance model here? So this is the governance piece that most teams skip, and it's where things unravel. The framework defines accountable roles and requires a signed decision at each delivery gate. Someone should own it, someone should sign it off. That accountability is what makes evaluation stick in practice. And please note that this is not a replacement for success by design, it's a companion. So success by design was built for deterministic software. The agent evaluation framework extends it to cover the evaluation of AI behavior which uses same life cycle, same gate, same language for your delivery teams already know. with the additional rigor that agents require. And critically, it's also tool agnostic. So whether you are building your agent in a Copilot Studio or Azure Foundry or custom code, the framework applies to all of these. So this doesn't change based on the tooling. Next. So before we go into the mechanics of how the framework operates, it's worth grounding ourselves in the 5 principles that underpin every decision within it. And these are not aspirational values. They are the operating rules that govern how evaluation is designed, run, and governed across the entire life cycle. So business value first. Every evaluation criterion must connect to a Dynamics 365 business outcome. Reduced case resolution time, increased customer satisfaction, cost saving from automation. So if a metric can't be tied to a business outcome, it's just data, not insight. So this principle stops team from measuring things that look impressive on a dashboard but don't actually tell you whether the agent is delivering value. As mentioned previously, governance from day one. Evaluation intent, ownership, and success criteria need to be defined before the first line of configuration or code is written, not after build, not during UAT. This is absolutely needs to be done from day one. This is the principle that most team violates, and evaluation becomes then an afterthought bolted at the end when it's too late to change anything. If you take one thing away from this session, let it be this one, that we need to have governance in place from day one. Then comes risk-based prioritization. So not all agents carry the same risk. Okay. So an agent that suggests knowledge-based article carries different risk that the one which write financial records or handling PII information. So this principle says match your evaluation rigor to the stakes. So high risk scenarios like finance, compliance, customer data, they demand more thorough threshold and more extensive test coverage. Low risk automation like knowledge sources, they can move faster. So please do not apply the same bar to everything. Now, incremental deployment is our next principle, which is you. So we always recommend to start with a limited scope, validate thoroughly, then scale, and let evaluation results drive that scale decision. If the evaluation data isn't there, the framework gives you the basis to say so and to make a risk-based case for phasing in the rollout, and then continuous improvement, which we talked about earlier. So these 5 principles, and you will see each of them show up again and again throughout the framework, throughout the session. So basically, they are the lens through which every evaluation decision gets made. With these as our foundation, let's look at who this framework is actually designed for. So next one. Okay, so one of the most common questions we get about the framework like this is who actually owns it? Is this an architect's tool, a project manager's checklist, a compliance exercise? So the simple answer is all of the above, and that's intentional. The agent evaluation framework is designed to be shared across every team involved in delivering and sustaining a D365 solution with AI agents. So let me walk through each group. So for solution architects, you are designing the agent architecture and the evaluation strategy from the ground up. So this framework gives you the structure to define what good looks like before build starts. And the 5 evaluation dimension give you a consistent vocabulary to work with within the engagements. So for delivery managers, uh, those are accountable for implementation quality across full life cycle. So this framework maps directly to success by design gates, so it fits into the delivery model you already operate. It gives you the governance artifacts and the accountability checkpoints to keep quality visible at every stage. For implementation partners that are building and deploying these agents on behalf of customers, this framework gives you a repeatable, defensible methodology to bring to every engagement, one that you can demonstrate to customers as evidence of delivery quality, not just technical execution. For business owners and sponsors that define what success looks like, they own the business outcomes. So this framework asks the owners and the stakeholders to be involved from day one, not just at sign off. So their input shapes the evaluation criteria, the threshold, and the definition of what good enough to deploy actually means for your business. Now, for compliance and governance team, they ensure that AI deployments meets the organization obligations around privacy, accountability, and responsible AI. So the framework builds compliance checkpoint into every stage of the life cycle, not as an afterthought, but as a first-class concern from initiate through operate. And the most important thing on this slide isn't any individual role, it's the bottom line, one framework, one shared language for every team. So too often evaluation breaks down because architects are talking about model performance, business owners are talking about outcomes, and compliance are talking about risk. And none of them are using the same vocabulary. And this framework gives everyone a common reference point. So again, repeating the same thing. So same life cycle, same gate, same language for everyone. That's what make it work in practice. With that, I'll pass it on to Saurabh to take you through life cycle and design considerations. Over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Akshat. So in this section, I will cover four key things of agent evaluation framework. The first one is about the evaluation lifecycle. The second is evaluation design document or EDD. Third, we will talk about the responsible AI checkpoints, and the fourth is the readiness tier, kind of a maturity roadmap like you can use to honestly answer that are we ready, are we production ready? So now with that, let's start with the first one, which is about the evaluation life cycle. So if you go to the next one. So the 5 evaluation stages mapped onto the success by design, same delivery rhythm with evaluation added at every stage. So stage 1, design and ideation, which is under initiate. So the question, should we build this? We should ask, and how will we know if it works? Evaluation can't be retrofitted before any prompt or plugin defines what good looks like, assess the risk, tighter thresholds for agents touching financials or the compliances, and open the ADD. The next stage is the stage 2, which is the build and configuration under the implementation phase of success by design, where we ask like, are we measuring the right things the right way? Don't wait until the build is done. Build your offline test set early and rerun it on very significant change. Prompt, model, tool, grounding data, make it in a red team and fairness checks from the day one. The third stage, which we have, is the pre-production, which is under prepare. Is there enough evidence to go live? And this is not one test run, it is a documented evidence case. Full regression across your D365 integration points, plus edge cases and adversarial testing. Output is formal go, no go. And think of it as the agent version of the go live readiness review. But your RAI reviewer is weighing evidence, not taking all the tests passed. The next stage 4, which we have, is a production deployment, which is under the deploy phase, where who accept the residual risk and under what conditions. So treat deployment as an experiment, shadow mode first and then controlled rollout. Expand on evidence, not on a calendar. Test your rollback before you launch. And the last stage is continuous operation under the operate, and is the agent is still performing as intended. And the go live is the start of the hardest phase. Model updates, the data shifts, uses evolve. You need drift monitoring across all 5 different quality dimensions, which Vishal is going to talk about. Production failure feedback into your offline set, and the periodic human review. Automated metrics missed what human catches. Now, with that, we will talk about one of the key document which we produce in this evaluation framework, which is the EDD. So if we go to the next one, The EDD is to agent what the solution blueprint is to traditional D365 project, the central governance artifacts, to create a design and ideation and update it at every gate. It's a living document, so when your RAI reviewer or release authority makes a call, the evidence is right there. And it captures the 6 key things. One, the business context and the objective, what the D365 process, what problems, what outcomes. The 2, evaluation intent and success criteria, what could look like with quantitative threshold where possible. 3, quality dimensions and the risk, which of the 5 dimensions matters most of this agent and what happens if it fails. The 4th is the methodology and the test data strategy, how evaluation runs the tools and how the data set is built and maintained. A 5th one is the roles and the responsibility, like who owns each stage, approves, go, no go, watches quality in production. And the last one, the 6th, is the gate decision with rational, a running log of what was decided, evidence reviewed, and residual risk accepted. The mindset shift here is the EDD is not a bureaucracy, it's a communication tool. It aligns business owners, the solution architects, delivery manager, and the compliance from the day one, what Akshat was talking about just now, and gives the evidence trail you need for audit or the post-incident review. Now, what are the key roles you have in the EDD is the next slide. So if you go to the next one. So the 5 roles, because when governance breaks down on an agent project, it's almost always because nobody knew who owned it. So the key roles which we have are the business owner, who defines the success criteria, approves evaluation intent, owns the go live decision. The evaluation lead design the strategy, picks methods and the tools, keep the EDD alive throughout the life cycle. And responsible AI reviewer validates safety, fairness, and compliance at every gate. Sign off is mandatory for the production. It's not an optional thing. The release authority enforces the deployment gate and accept residual risk on behalf of the organization. And the last one is the service owner, who monitors the production quality, responds to incident, and drives the continuous improvement. So now these are the key roles which you have as part of the EDD from the governance perspective. Now with that, let's move to the next one, which is around the responsible AI. So responsible AI, 2 things like core criteria you address in the EDD and the safety gate that validates them at a specific point in the life cycle. And the core criteria on the left-hand side, what you see at every gate, 3 things have to be addressed explicitly and not assumed. One is the fairness, the consistent performance across segment, user types, input formats, aggregated accuracy is sneaky. It hides a failure in a specific subgroup. So agent evaluation framework calls for a statistical fairness analysis across different segments before the production. The second is the privacy and security. So no PII in logs or the output, appropriate access control. The agent respects your D365 security roles and the row level security. And the third one is the transparency and the accountability. Reasoning logged and the traceable. Users know they are interacting with AI, escalation passed to the human and defined and the tested. And on the right-hand side, what you see is the 5 safety gates. Each has an entry criteria, evidence, and the decision. So which are like at design, the RAI requirements reviewed, at build, the pre-production safety evaluation, at pre-production, the production readiness gate, where you're monitoring dashboard live, incident runbook, full audit, log traceability, and the sign-off. And in the production, the continuous monitoring gate, weekly automated RAI report, monthly human review for all the output, and real-time alerting on the fairness, drift, or unsafe responses. and the incident response, the post-incident review, the root cause, mitigations, preventive actions, feeding back into the eval set. Every incident should make the next version stronger. Now with that, let's move to the next one, which is about the eval set, like quality versus the quantity. And this is where we see the most common mistake, and it's easy to fix. The teams are trying to build a bigger evaluation set they can. 1,000 generic cases feels rigorous, but it's not. Evaluation framework is explicit and start with a small number of high quality cases, not 1,000 generic ones. So where the quality over the quantity. So the four key things make a case high quality. One, a representative plug edge in the adversarial balance by the risk. The framework is mix of, let's say, 30 to 50% representative. The two is the scenario-based agentic workflows involves planning, tools use, state transition, and tests have to capture the multi-turn reasoning and not a single replies. The third one is the clear input, expected outcomes, and the criteria. Deterministic, pass, fail, or a rubric, either way explicit, no hand waving. The fourth one is the version and the continuous evolve. Every production incident becomes a new test case, as I just now called out, and that's how the test set gets smarter. And then you have the readiness tier, your maturity roadmap, and you can define that, be honest with yourself, like where you are in terms of defining these tiers. So tier one is the foundational, where you define 25 to 50 cases for a manual review, basic correctness, and the sandbox or the early pivot pilots. The tier two is the developing, where you go with 100+ cases with edge, adversarial, and automated benchmarking, documented RAI review, low risk production. And the tier three is the mature, which should cover all the 5 dimensions. And then the tier four is about the optimize, the CI/CD integration, evaluation, telemetry feeding, the data set, the periodic human review, and the full audit trail, and high risk or the high volume workflows. So this is how you kind of ground yourself in terms of the consideration when you are designing your evaluation data sets. Now with that, I hand over to Vishal to talk about the next segment in this talk.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. In current section, we'll be talking about the dimensions of the evaluations. So as you realize now, agentic quality is not something which can be captured by a single metric. So it has to be carried across and validated across a series of metrics, and each of them basically evaluate whether those are serving the right purpose for our evaluation. Because an agent can perform well on one dimension, but it is possible that it is not following all the other criteria. So it is very essential for us to realize that it falls and fulfills all the requirements and all the dimensions that we are going to talk about. So the 5 dimensions that we have recognized are correctness, safety, reliability, alignment, and efficiency. Now, correctness is basically associated to the task completion ability of the agent, whether it is doing that in a successful manner. Safety, which speaks of the RAI alignment and the guardrails that one needs to abide by. Reliability being the consistency and the robustness of the agent in order to deliver what has been consistently requested for. Alignment is to align on the business objectives and the user expectations. And finally, the efficiency, the cost, the latency, and the resource utilization of the agent. We'll talk more about these in further depth. So if we talk about the first element in this case, that is the correctness. The core definition by which we would go forward to define this would be that whether you're how accurately or factually correct does your agent respond with. So if a correct agent will give you a right answer, but it also works on the information which it already has. So your data, your policies, your records, and it produces the outputs that you can act on. In D365 terms, if we talk about, it extracts the right data, creates accurate records, routes cases to the right places, and does not fill in the gaps by guessing. That is how we are trying to define the correctness of the agent in current context. So how do we measure this particular aspect of an agent? We should start with the ground truth comparison, comparing the outputs to the known correct answers. Number two, having an expert human reviewer. That could be your business stakeholder or the ones who have been defining or driving your EDD document, who are defining the requirements for your agent. They could be the first layer of human evaluation that could help us to ascertain that whether the agent is performing in a correct manner or not. Automated fact checking on the knowledge basis, when we have a known source of information against which you would compare your agent's response to ensure that it is associating and reflecting it in the right way, and consistency across those related queries to ensure that it is fulfilling those requirements. If we talk about certain examples in current situation, if we talk of factual accuracy, a customer service agent, if we talk about, it could correctly cite policy information, pricing, and product details from authoritative sources. If we talk about compare an agent's output to a known correct answer, and that is one way it could help us to ensure that the representation test data set is correct. It should run on automated checks against a master data source. And does that provide you with the created record match in the right way? Using scoring rubrics for your outputs cannot be verified with an exact match. So it should do it on a corrective way to ensure that it is comparing the right results. So this is the first instance of how the data could be evaluated. The second measure that we're going to talk against is the safety. Now, a safe agent stays within the boundaries that it has been given. It never causes harm beyond them. So this means two things. First, it respects your security roles and organization policies. It does not expose any sensitive information in its responses or logs, and it will not take actions if it is not authorized to take. Second, it does not generate content that is harmful, offensive, or inappropriate, regardless of how it is prompted in. In D365 context, if I talk about, it honors the row level security, does not disclose any data across organizational boundaries, and does not process any transactions that require here. So the defining criteria that we ask here is, does your agent avoid generating those harmful, offensive, or any of the inappropriate content, and does respect the security boundaries of the organization? And in the context of measuring these criteria, one should ensure that it is done using adversarial testing by providing with harmful prompts and to validate whether the response of the agent is in the right manner. Doing a security penetration testing to ensure that your agent is fulfilling to those boundaries. Content classification and toxicity scoring, just to validate whether the response of the agent is in the right manner and not toxic or insensitive. And of course, the privacy leak detection to ensure that any of the secure information is not something which is shared across the board. For example, if there is a healthcare agent which handles personal health information data, it should ensure that none of those things are leaked outwards to any of the resources, because that is a highly secure piece of information. So that is really critical for us to understand that this level of information should be highly secure, maintained, and the agent does not violate the required guardrails that are meant to be put forward for those. Proceeding on to the third metric that we have in here, the third dimension, reliability. The key essence of reliability that we try to define here is, does your agent perform consistently? Does it handle the errors gracefully? And does it maintain the availability? So your agent is required to be reliable in a longer sense to ensure that it is able to provide responses to a wide range of responses, to a wide range of users, and it is not getting distressed, not getting subsided, not getting crashed in the process of it. So it has to be reliable so that it consistently provides the right set of information to the users over to a varied range of questions that are asked to it. Of course, this is managed and measured across multiple ways. For example, load and stress testing, ensuring that your agent is able to manage the high amount of load and stress before it goes live into the production environment. Monitoring of latency, throughput, and error rates to ensure that we're able to keep a close track of whether your agent is erroring out, if it is having high amount of latency, which could be a really bad indicator when it goes live into the production environment. Variation analysis, or to check how much the data oscillates or variates from a standard required input that it needs, that is expected of it, a delta analysis of sorts. And chaos engineering, to introduce features to test the resilience of your agent, to ensure that even if you try and nudge it to be inconsistent, unreliable, it should keep on handling those situations and processes in a way that would allow it to be reliable in the longer sense. For example, a field service scheduling agent performs well during low traffic hours, for example. But if the reliability testing would really help us to ask the harder questions, does it perform the same way at peak volume? What happens if a required field is missing from the work order? What happens when the external scheduling system is slow to respond? A reliable agent handles these kind of situations gracefully, completing what it can, retrying after an appropriate logic, or escalating clearly to when it is needed to the right stakeholders when it cannot proceed on its own. So these aspects of an agent are really critical for one to have in order to be reliable in the longer sense. Number 4 comes the alignment. Now, alignment is the agent's behavior to check whether it is aligning with the business objective or the core principle on which the agent has been built, whether it is for associating itself to the organization values to which it has been associated with. So an aligned agent behaves the way your organization intends it to, not just technically, but in terms of judgment. It follows your business rules, reflects the right tone for your brand and the context, and knows when to escalate a decision rather than make it independently. Alignment is a dimension that answers the question, does the agent actually represent us well? So those business objectives must be aligned at all terms to ensure that the company's representation is done in the highest form. For example, if there is a customer service agent for a B2B manufacturer, it is to be designed to handle product and order inquiries. In current sense, the alignment would mean that it communicates in a professional, precise tone, appropriate to the business relationship. When a customer requests any custom configuration outside the standard parameters, it should escalate to a sales engineer rather than taking any response which might not be appropriate. It also applies on refund and return policies as defined without making any exceptions based on how the customer phrases the request. And now how to test it? A business stakeholder would review and score the response that has been provided by the agent. There has to be a sentiment and tone analysis just to ensure that the sentiment is suitably maintained, policy compliance, and of course A/B testing to ensure that the business KPIs are satisfactorily met. It's also curious and important to understand that why it is of so much relevance. This would ensure that the user goals are met and the business objectives are appropriately reflected. At the same time, it should ensure that the companies and the organizational policies are well reflected in the customer market. Proceeding on to the fifth and the final dimension that we have in the current section, which is efficiency. Now, efficiency is basically to check whether your agent is optimized to the resource usage, the cost, and the time to value factors of it. An efficient agent gets the job done without wasting time or resources. It completes tasks in an appropriate number of steps, avoids redundant lookups, and responds quickly enough to be genuinely useful. An agent scale across high volume D365 workflows efficiently directly affects operating costs and user experience. An agent that works correctly but takes minutes to respond or consume excessive amounts of scale creates a different kind of problem. For example, if we have an invoice processing agent that reviews incoming vendor invoices and matches them to purchase orders, an efficient agent would basically take only relevant PO orders for each invoice, not the entire PO history. It should resolve straightforward matches in seconds and flag exceptions immediately, rather than attempting multiple retrieval processes before escalating. Across hundreds of invoices coming in daily, the difference between an efficient and an inefficient agent is measurable in both cost and the processing time. So how would we measure this? Cost tracking. The most crucial factor that comes to play in this category would be to associate cost invested in the API calls, in the compute time, in the storage, and all the resources required to host the agent. In performance benchmarking, to ensure that the performance that is maintained per task, how long the agent takes to complete each step, that is really relevant for this in the current situation. Conversation length and the resolution time analysis. To ensure that all the time that is invested in this process, should not be too lengthy, too short. It should be in an appropriate amount of length so that it is fulfilling the requirement and yet not overburdening the end user with the information that is provided to them, nor does it provide them with limited info that would leave them confused. And of course, resource utilization, to ensure that none of the resources which are being invested to host this agent are getting wasted. Curious factor to note here that why it is so relevant, because it has critical for business usability as well as the user experience to ensure that it is relevant in that aspect to be efficient in that process. So these are the 5 principles based on which each of them are critically relevant for the agent to abide by so that they are correct, safe, reliable, aligned to the requirements, and efficient in the longer run to ensure that they are working and fulfilling the business requirements in the best form. So moving forward, we shall talk about what are the different evaluation methods and the patterns in which we are able to work with. So before we jump into that, we need to understand what is the distinguishing factor between the two. When we speak of patterns, these are basically the strategy or the approach one would take in the process of evaluation in order to define when, where, and under what conditions an agent is to be evaluated. That is a pattern, the evaluation pattern that you define. When it comes to evaluation methods, now that's where the technique comes into play. The technique is basically what technique you're using in order to perform the evaluation. Defining how the quality is to be measured of the agent evaluation is where the method comes in. When we speak of common examples on both the categories, these are how they follow. And we'll speak more about them at length for some of the cases that we have chosen. For example, the common cases of evaluation patterns would be offline evaluation, online or in-production evaluation, continuous evaluations, regression evaluation, and A/B testing. When we speak of offline evaluation, they're performed outside the production environment using fixed data sets and scenarios. In continuous evaluation, we talk about automatically rerunning evaluations on every model so that they are automated and they keep on running in the process. Regression evaluation is focused on detecting behavioral changes so that we're able to address those regressions that are observed in the process. A/B testing are when we are doing a multiple agent variants evaluated simultaneously on live traffic. These are the common patterns that we deal with. What are the associated methods that one can look into? So these would be the techniques that one utilizes in order to evaluate those respective agents. Golden dataset comparison. Golden dataset meaning your set of dataset that is basically having all the compute environments which has the ground truth responses included in them. That basically would help us to ensure that whether your agent's response is validated appropriately to your expected response. Task goal success scoring, to score whether your intended task is being met in the right way or not. LLM as judge, human in the loop. Now, these are where we are using an LLM or a human in the loop that would basically evaluate the process on your behalf. And then, of course, we have the automated benchmark evaluations, in which we are using predefined metrics, which would help us to define these evaluations. So we'll speak more closely about these evaluations in coming sections, in which we have taken few examples of each of these categories to ensure that they are being talked about. The first piece that we speak of and we try and define and distinguish between are the online versus offline evaluations. Now, the offline evaluations that we should first of all understand are the pre-production evaluations, which are carried out before your agent has gone live into the system. You ascertain that all the test data is maintained on a predefined test sets. You're able to repeatedly execute the principles and you're able to without having any user impact in the picture. And we iteratively understand and define and debug the agent to perform better by reforming it and refining the process, ensuring with that it is being run through with the test data with an intent that this would help us to decide whether your agent is good to go for the production system. On the contrary, the online system is basically defined for real production information. Your agent is already live in the infrastructure. It is dealing with the right customers out there. The objective is for it to interact with them and get the real production data to know whether it is performing in the right manner. But the ground truth is the missing element here. But that's where the knowledge sources come in, where we have to ascertain that whether the agent's response aligns with the expected response which is available in the knowledge sources that is provided to the agent. It's a balance that has to be maintained in current use case to ensure that the cost and the latency that is done on the repeatability of this offline evaluation is to be maintained. We use proxy signals and heuristics to ensure that the iterations are not impacting the actual user scenario that is using this system. For customer consent is really critical to ensure that none of the PII information or the secure details are being utilized in the evaluation process, ensuring that this dataset does not have any of those pieces of information. And the purpose for this is not to decide the go no go because the agent is already live, but to decide that what key instances or what key edge cases are something which slip through are not covered in the test datasets that we managed and evaluated before. Now, it's not that we choose either of the two. Both are critically important and both are essential. It is essential to ensure that your offline pre-production evaluations to serve as a controlled validation and tell you whether or not your agent is in a good capacity to go to the live system. Your online production system is basically to ensure that the continued performance in the real world condition is being met and none of the situations are being flopping through. If I take a basic example of both the two cases, if we take a sales order agent, if we test an agent with 100 curated order emails in a sandbox environment, that is the example for an offline evaluation, in which we compare it with the extracted results of manually labeled ground truth. We iterate over prompts and we validate the logic until accuracy reaches a certain score that is considered a good benchmark for us. Now, if you talk about the online evaluation of the same, that would basically to mean we monitor each and every production record and we extract the confidence scores for each of them. And then we track the exception rates and scenario to go. And by each use case, we'll have to ensure that that system is properly maintained. So now we'll talk about briefly the different evaluation methods that we have. So human in the loop is the current system that we're going to talk about. Now, this is for subjective use cases like brand alignment, tone, and comparative correctness judgments. Here, what works is this depending, we can generate a set of sample outputs, and based on that, we present them to a human evaluator, and the human would basically, in the loop, would basically be the domain experts, the stakeholders, and they would evaluate the process, grade the system, and then aggregate the stores together. Now, while doing so, it is very crucial for us to understand that one should use multiple evaluators so that it is reliably and there is no bias. One should provide with clear-cut scoring criteria so that none of the things have any confusion when the scoring is being done. One should calibrate the evaluators with the right set of trainings to ensure that they are well equipped with the right approach to take on, and they have inter-iter agreement to validate the consistency. So this is a human in the loop, the basic foundational use case that is often worked with. When you move to a more automated process of the same requirement, that is automated benchmarks. You create a set of data set, and if you want to run this over a wide range of ground truth based data set and it has to have a series of requirements to it, then that's where this automated benchmark would be really critical for you to understand, because human would not be scalable, so to say. In that case, you need to provide your agent with the test set inputs. You run your agent on the test inputs and you ask it to grade the requirements on your behalf to ensure that those metrics are rated properly. For example, exact match, semantic similarity, and then we again report them and we aggregate the performance statistics. The key thing to note here, it should be that all the data set should be based on production workloads. They should be regularly update the test set to avoid overfit those requirements, and we should always version control these test sets to ensure that they are iteratively maintained and ensure that none of them have a similar set of questions which are being repeated across. Moving further to LLM as judge, in which we basically use a powerful LLM, for example GPT-5, to evaluate your agent's output. We repeat the process with LLM as a judge, and we provide the LLM with the right defining criteria based on which it has to perform those operations, and then following the same approach, it has to aggregate the scores for the overall assessment. It should be validated against a human first to ensure that it is being in the right sense. We should use proper, defined, detailed prompts for the LLM to know what is the judging criteria. It should not have any biases involved in the process, and it should combine with the human review for high-stake decisions. So this is a comparative study and a collective way to look at all the three use cases that we have just spoken of. There are multiple others which are available, but for current example, we have spoken about only these three use cases. And finally, we speak of the goals and the criteria that are essential for the evaluation process. Now, each evaluation should always be performed with an intent in mind. That is the goal that we are trying to fulfill. So AI evaluations must exist to ensure that they are fit for production and safe to scale, not just to fulfill the requirements. So the primary goals that they are required to fulfill are basically based on different inputs that are coming to it. So for example, we provide the agents with the environment details, the domain data, conversation history, user prompts. So these are the key inputs which are provided to the agent. And that is provided as a requirement to the agent so that it fulfills those requirements appropriately. As an outcome, we can expect to have exact inputs. We could have one of many valid answers. We could have rubric-based responses. And then we can have structure-based or behavioral expectations associated with it. So the key thing to understand is to ensure that the evaluation goals are well met. It should meet your quality standards. It should maintain your business alignment, and it should, of course, not lead to any risk, not have any regressions involved in the process, and it should allow and have an enabled confident deployment and scaling process. So these are the different goals that one would aspire to build an agent with, so that the evaluation process ensures that these primary goals are appropriately fulfilled. And the criteria for the same is being defined on the 5 dimensions that we spoke of. That your agent should be evaluated against the 5 principles and the 5 dimensions that we have recognized for our agents to ensure that those things are well met, and those decisions would help us to ensure that that appropriately is defined for the system. So the key takeaways that we have from the current session is that evaluation is not just it's not just a checkpoint. It has to be a repetitive, a life cycle process. It's not a one-stop shop. It has to be done iteratively over time to ensure that your evaluation is being done, capturing the right test sets, and it is able to provide with all the right responses to the questions that are being put forward within it. RAI is an operationalized via principles and safety gates. It has to be ensured that all the required safety measures are deployed to ensure that your agent fulfills those practices and does the required task in a safe, secure manner. Start with the high quality eval set and then scale and evolve. Creating something massive with low quality would not be the right approach. The ideal approach would be to start small, have high quality eval questions, keep all the good cases, bad cases, edge cases into consideration, and based on that, you try and scale them to cover the wider outcome. The 5 dimensions that we've spoken of, now those are, of course, the key principles based on which every agent should be evaluated against. There are multiple methods to perform those evaluations. There are multiple patterns associated in those evaluations, and combining those different methods and approaches would help us to have a comprehensive coverage over the process. There are different offline versus online evaluations, but both are equally essential. And of course, there should be a clear-cut criteria based on which you want to ensure that your agent is being evaluated against. So with this, I conclude the current session for today. Thank you so much for joining in. If there are any questions, you can share them. And this is the current survey link.
Yeah, Vishal, if you could go to the QR code slide. There were no questions in the chat today, but if you think of anything after the fact, please go ahead and still add them. And I posted a short survey in the Q&A panel, as we'd love to hear your feedback on today's session and what you'd like to see in future events. You can also scan this QR code and it'll take you to the same survey. As a reminder, the recording will be made available on the Dynamics TechTalk community site within 5 business days, along with this deck, which has links to additional resources. Thank you to Akshat, Saurabh, and Vishal, our presenters, and to you, our audience, for attending our Tech Talk today. Have a great day.